All right. Well, I'm Joan Van Biesler, and I'm the Director of Unitarian Universalist Justice Ohio. And Tad, if you want to introduce yourself.
I am a board member of UJO. That's kind of shorthand for Unitarian Universalist Justice Ohio. I am also on the board of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland, up here in Cleveland. So I am a public defender and have my own law firm, which is my bona fides for presenting on these bills.
Absolutely wonderful. So I'm going to say a little bit about one of the bills that we have been fighting ever since 2019. And then I'm going to turn it over to Tad, who has a PowerPoint to share and looking at some of the things that are coming up, with the current House and Senate and the Ohio State House. And then we'll just have a discussion and see what's on your mind around these things. Okay. Now, I know that we have been fighting Senate Bill 33. That was the anti-protest bill, the one that made it a felony to do certain kinds of protest at infrastructure sites, oil and gas, basically, oil, gas, fracking, plastics, the anti-pipeline bill kind of thing. It was the one that was drawn up after Standing Rock. And we have been fighting that forever. We thought we had it beat last January, and it disappeared. It went through the committee of the House, and then it disappeared, only to show up the very last week of the lame duck session here in Ohio, right? And so it got passed before we even knew it was
And
coming
now
up
to
for a
Amna
hearing.
Nabad, who
We
has been
knew
on the National Mall all
we
this
only,
day from
pardon me,
early morning into tonight. So Amna, you started out this day looking.
we only had like a couple of days to really get more letters and postcards and phone calls in to the governor, DeWine, and ask him to veto this thing. Well, he's kind of set on it. He got it December 30th. We sent in tons of postcards, letters, phone calls, emails, you name it. And then he signed it. And then he signed it last week. So Senate Bill 33 is the one, like I said, that makes it that the felony for certain kinds of certain kinds of protest at those kinds of sites. But what we're now planning to do with this is we are going to be collecting testimony from people throughout Ohio, people that are concerned with environmental justice, people that are concerned with First Amendment rights. We're going to be recording this. We're going to be then taking it to the United Nations Council on Human Rights, and we're going to be asking for a ruling that this is against their principles of human rights, the United Nations Principles of Human Rights. Now, is that going to change the Ohio legislature? No, let's be real. Okay. But it would then give us a moral standing. It would then give us ammunition that we can then use in the coming legislative session, the one that we're entering in right now, when the legislature proposes more anti-protest legislation. And we already have heard very strong rumors, actually more than rumors, that there will be anti-protest legislation introduced that will make it an offense to block a street like the people did during the movement for Black Lives. Like getting off a sidewalk will be a felony, that kind of thing. It will be coming under the name of police protection. So we are watching that. We're watching it like a hawk. We're going to need all the ammunition we can get. And that's why we're going to take the Senate Bill 33 one, which is focused on pipelines, to the United Nations Council on Human Rights. And then we are already starting to gear up to fight the anti-protest bills that will come through our legislature this session. Any questions? You'll be seeing a lot about that. Any questions about that? Okay. Yeah, it seems, and there's a lot of research on this one, that the more people take to the streets in righteous causes, the more anti-protest legislation shows up in certain state legislatures. Okay. I mean, no big surprise there, but it is showing up now in a heavy way
Now, do
in Ohio.
you think what happened, at the Capitol is going to further strengthen some of these desire for these bills?
Well, we are talking about totally peaceful,
Oh, I
non,
understand that. I
yeah,
know I understand that, but I
it
just
will.
think it feeds into it in some
It will.
ways.
It will. And we're going to have to counter that
Yeah.
by showing ourselves to be entirely different in our approach and why we're taking to the streets.
And if I just want to add a little ditty in there, even if new bills were directly purely at activities such as the riots and things, what happened at the Capitol, we have more than sufficient laws on the books right now to punish and deter those types of things, in my opinion. And then the further laws, I think, would be um, more prone to be used against people who are protesting or riot or demonstrating on the opposite end of the spectrum, or against people of color.
Yeah.
So I think even if in blue states where those types of measures might be being introduced for reasons that aren't related to silencing folk, I think if they pass, they will have a negative impact on vulnerable communities.
Yes. The whole idea is to chill protest, to stop it, to have people question whether they even want to be involved. I've already gotten 2 calls from people who wanted to protest pipelines down by the Ohio Valley, asking, what can we do? We don't want to have a felony on our record, but we need to say something about these pipelines that they're putting through our backyards. So it's already started. Okay. Well, let's, and Tad has up a wonderful PowerPoint right there.
Alrighty, thank you, Joan. I am cognizant of it being Inauguration Day, so this is a relatively short PowerPoint, and I hope to hit through a few key things. So just a few changes in terms of the Senate's leadership, in terms of committees. Obviously, I don't expect folks to read all these, but this will be information that we can, I hope, provide on our website. Just going through what committees are who's in charge of what committees. As you can see, Republicans chair everything, as can be expected with their majority, right? But these are the people who we need to speak to and hold accountable for the decisions they make. I tried to find the equivalent for the House that was a little more hidden in the depths of the legislature's website, but rest assured, more information on those appointments will be coming out here soon as well. But again, these are the people who are going to be lobbying, who are going to be talking to, who are going to be sending postcards to. Even beyond just your normal representatives, I expect us to be contacting these folks, especially the ones relating to government oversight, ways and means, things like that. So again, I just want to give a quick overview of the last few days of the 133rd General Assembly, typo there. But I have listed these next 2 slides as bills Tad liked and bills Tad did not like. I did not want to necessarily put UUJO's name on here, and I did add a disclaimer for the first time on one of these PowerPoints saying, hey, this is just me giving a presentation for UUJO. Even though I'm a board member, these are not UUJO's positions, things that I talk about here. But so one of the things I was really excited about was House Bill 1. This expanded something called treatment in lieu of conviction. And while the name is a little legalistic, it's all kind of written there. These are chances for folks with low-level felonies to get treatment instead of a criminal conviction on their record. So that was expanded. It decreased some of the eligibility requirements, opening up that type of avenue for more defendants. It codified when someone can get their record sealed relating to this. So before there was a lot of confusion about when someone who went through this program and got a dismissal can get their record sealed. That has been clarified. Previously, the Ohio Supreme Court kicked that back to the lower courts, saying, well, that is confusing language. You guys can seal them immediately after they complete the program or like 4 years down the road. Your choice, judges. So this is allowing for a more uniform application of justice. In terms of other things that I thought were positive, there was a ban on the fail first treatment for cancer patients, and I've included a link to the analysis of that bill there. There is no longer imprisonment without the possibility of parole for children for people who commit crimes while they are juveniles in Ohio. So that's obviously very good. As a juvenile public defender, I find that to be quite a necessary reform. And now folks can do community service in order to get their driver's license back if it had been suspended and they need to pay their reinstatement fee. Obviously, some of our more ambitious goals for this year, such as Senate Bill 3, um, Senate Bill 11, things like that didn't become law this year. I expect we'll see, if not equivalents, similar pushes coming up here in the coming year. But it's always going to be very delicate trying to get the majority needed to pass that type of legislation with the makeup that Ohio has currently. Now into bills I did not like. This one looks a bit more successful, but I really focus on the worst of the worst here. A lot of things focusing on untrained carry in schools, in terms of allowing teachers to have guns and to do so without proper training. That did not become law. A lot of the pandemic restrictions, and by that I mean reactionary bills saying, oh, well, let's let businesses not allow, let's allow businesses to choose whether or not they follow the mask mandate. Things like that, those didn't pass. And the ones that did were vetoed, and I'll get into that later. But unfortunately, a lot of abortion-related bills did pass in terms of banning telemedicine abortion, requiring burials for aborted materials became law. And that's going to be really hard for a lot of people in our state. And unfortunately, Ohio is now a stand your ground state on top of all that. And Joan touched on Senate Bill 33. So we were hoping that Governor DeWine would veto Senate Bill 33, and Joan touched on why that was such a bad law. There was no governor's statement onto why that bill was not vetoed. However, the Stand Your Ground law did have such a statement, and I included a link to that. In terms of bills that were vetoed, these were bills that went through that would limit the ability of the Director of Health to, react to pandemics. More specifically, there were also ones that would have targeted county fairs, like a restriction that would have said, Director of Health, specifically during county fairs, you have no jurisdiction here. But DeWine vetoed both of those for I think, apparent reasons. And ending on a bit of a sour note, today 100,000 people were purged off of the Ohio voter rolls. That number is lower than what was initially proposed, but I've included a link to the names and to the names of the folk who were purged. You can search for yourself, loved ones, neighbors there, and inform them, hey, I saw your name listed and you're no longer registered to vote. Update that. And hopefully we can get a few of those people who were purged to get re-registered if need be. So
I'll
go
note that
ahead.
the link is also on the UJO Facebook page. We put the link for checking the purged names.
And again, I did have a relatively short PowerPoint today, but I thought given the historic occasion that would be appropriate.
Thank you. Any questions for Tad? Okay.
I just really quick, before you go ahead, Caroline, I was just going to say, hey, in terms of the treatment in lieu of conviction, that was part of a bigger push over the past 2 years to expand record sealing in Ohio. I still think that's an incomplete push, but I wanted to kind of put that in context. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just wondered with the burial or proper disposal of aborted fetuses, are people who have miscarriages, are they required to do that?
No, thankfully.
Yeah.
Interesting that they.
It took a lot of testimony in the hearings to get that point across, by the way.
Right, because it's just vindictive to abortion. But already on the books, and I don't know how to cite it. I don't know where it is, but in the past, we've not been able to allow even patients who wanted to take their remains home and bury them. That was forbidden. So it's like, on the one hand, you're saying this is to preserve dignity or something. And on the other hand, they're saying, but you can't do it except our way.
Yep. I've heard people refer to that bill as the mandating of Christian burial for
Yeah.
aborted materials as well, which I think is probably an accurate statement. It's just a bit of a different lens on it.
Hey, Tad, what
Yeah.
is the technical definition difference between cremation and incineration?
That's a question I don't know the answer to, Mary. I'm sorry.
Because that's what we already do. All medical waste is sent to a special handler for incineration.
I would suspect, Mary, that it's like human remains are cremated and everything else is incinerated.
And it probably costs more
Exactly.
Yeah.
because
Really?
you have to go to a crematorium.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As opposed to the medical center that incinerates. Yeah.
Yep. I do have some other things that I've been looking at, you know, because the House and the Senate and the governor all say what their priorities are going to be this year, which is kind of interesting. What I was getting from a lot of the reports is that nobody knows what to do with House Bill 6. That is the one that bailed out the nuclear power plants and was connected to the dark money. And there was all kinds of hearings about it in 2020. And they decided to punt it to 2021 in the next legislative session. So they haven't done anything about that. That's $1.3 billion nuclear bailout bill. And of course, whether to repeal it or repeal it in part, or to argue about an entire replacement is something that the legislators are going back and forth on. And the governor at one point said, we've got to repeal it. And then he was talking about replacing it, but not entirely. So it's kind of a mess. And a lot of it's going to, I think, hinge on whether Householder and some of the other people involved who haven't yet been indicted and charged, what kind of charges arrive from their dabbling in dark money enterprises. What do you think, Tad?
I'm relatively pessimistic about the whole situation. I think everything related to the confusion, or I think that's all punting until the public has its eye off the ball.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my more cynical take on it.
They're sitting on it until we forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, didn't DeWine get quite a bit of money from First Energy also?
Yes,
for
he
his-
did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I
So
think the big thing is make sure you don't get your electricity from First Energy if you can help it. Sign to another company.
oh,
Vote with your pocketbook.
that's true. And then any legislation that comes down that promotes transparency and ability to address those kinds of dark money issues, we want to support. Regardless of whether it's futile or not, we want to support in a big way. The other big thing that I've heard of is that they're finally going to try and address school spending reform. You know, remember in 1997, I wasn't even here yet, but our funding model for Ohio schools was declared unconstitutional, and they've never done anything about it. But Governor DeWine and the House leadership and the Senate leadership, both minority and majority, have said in public statements that they want to prioritize fixing the school funding problem. once again, we'll see where that goes. And we do have a 2-year budget coming up very soon. And I've sent out to all congregational leaders the opportunity to be part of a couple of webinars about the budget and looking at what it is and how, we can do some advocacy work around it with some of our partners. But that's going to take some advocacy to keep them to their word of doing something realistic with the school structures. But the budget is when that kind of action happens. Once again, Tad, had you heard anything more about school funding?
Just that people were really optimistic for this session
Good.
or this prior session. So I know some folks are deflated, but they do think that there's genuine interest on both sides of the aisle to get it done. They were hoping that would happen in December. It didn't, but I don't think that will is going away, which is a little more optimistic than I am about the House Bill 6 situation.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And then, like I said, the campaign finance reform is tied up with the whole House Bill 6 discussion. One thing that LaRose, our Secretary of State, has said is a real high priority for him is some election reform. I mean, we saw problem after problem after problem with the way we have structured some of our regulations right now around Ohio elections. And he now supports the idea of allowing people to apply for absentee ballots online. Yes, not voting online, but apply for the darn things. So you don't have to go printing them out hard copy and mail them in by the post office. And he also wants to allow counties to set up multiple early vote centers. We're also already pushing him to allow for multiple drop boxes, secure drop boxes, because in some of our rural counties, people had to drive miles to take their ballot into a drop box if they didn't want to stand in line and risk getting COVID. And, greater disclosure, transparency on political spending. He said that's a priority for him to combat that dark money efforts. So, we may want to really support Secretary LaRose and to be an advocate for his better angel when it comes to election reform. But I know Common Cause is on board with that, League of Women Voters, Ohio Votes, and other partners that we've worked with in the past on these items are going to be really pushing that. So you can expect that we'll be working with some of that as well. It's necessary. And we'd like to see purge reform. I mean, when Tad was saying the 98,000 folk purged, we really need to have some transparency there. The League of Women Voters wants to see that list. They want to be able to check it because in the past, when there have been purges, a couple of years ago, we were finding large numbers of people who were on there erroneously.
Yeah. How did I get there? Do you know? I mean, I got all these ballots for someone who hasn't lived in my house for 10 years. So I know but he's still registered to vote here. And so I was getting his stuff. He should be purged. I was sick of getting his mail, but yeah, but I don't know how do they do it? Is it you haven't voted in X numbers of years?
If you haven't voted in 4 years, then you get a cute little postcard and it says, "Are you still here?" And then supposedly in another 2 years, if they don't show up as having voted or changed their address and voted, then they are purged. But since each county has its own process and its own database and its own people and its own computer glitches and its own crappy folk who can't type right, pardon me.
No, I get it. Yeah.
Okay. People who have even voted in every election that's come along get purged.
Gotcha. Okay.
People
so
who
not
have
careful enough.
Yeah, they're just not. There's just too many errors in the structure that we have. And even Frank LaRose said we've got a mess. Our 88 county system for election, he said, is a mess, is a confusing mess. And that's why the purging is really problematic. There's no check, no balance,
Gotcha.
no guarantee that they're doing it the right way. Yeah. So those are the things that are coming up this year that I see. Tad, other than things you've said, do you see something else coming up this year?
Nothing right now. I would just try to. You did a good job previously, Joan, of discussing potential new protesting laws. I think Debbie hit the nail on the head when it was discussed that the riot at the Capitol might be linked now to these types of things, and that's something I think advocates should be prepared and armed with the tools to counter those arguments. And unfortunately, that's one of those things that's really easy to draw the comparison, and then it takes a lot of effort on the other side to debunk it.
Yeah.
So, and I feel like that's so true for so many positions, but
It's going to be hard. First Amendment and voting rights are going to be really hard. And then keeping corruption out of the state house. All of these various things we've been talking about are directly tied to that. And then add the idea of trying to redistrict, draw the new lines for redistricting without gerrymandering. That's going to be an ongoing issue.
I wanted to include this in the PowerPoint, but I couldn't find the link because I didn't bookmark it. But there's a very, I'm going to say fun interactive program where you can draw all sorts of maps for like state offices and the federal representatives. I had quite a bit of fun with it. It breaks it down by demographics, by age groups. You can fill in counties. These are the things I find fun, folk. I'm sorry.
I think it's on League of Women Voters website, and Common Cause has links to it. But and I have a link to it on the UUJO Facebook page.
Well,
Okay.
I'll be darned. That's probably where I found it, Joan.
Okay. Well, questions or thoughts, my friends? Okay. Now you know what we're going to be working with this year, and we'll be sending out, another notice so that we'll have a legislative update next month. We'll see more about what the legislature actually has proposed and is working on. We'll see what they're doing in terms of those anti-protest legislation, and whether Frank LaRose is a man of his word in terms of election reform. So we'll move forward with that and other things as they come along.
What's the Rules and Reference Committee? What do they do? 'Cause our senator is on that, so I just wondered he's one of the chair people or whatever. What does that one do?
Okay. Well, after something is passed in the House and it goes to the Senate, or pardon me, passed in the Senate and goes to the House, and the House changes it, it comes back to Rules and Reference for, what do I call it, alignment is one of the things they do. What other things do they cover, Ted?
I was just going to mention the alignment, but
Yeah.
I can delve a bit more into that. I've not been focusing on much on that committee, so.
Yeah, because they're not really one that does a lot of proposals or hearings and such. But it's the rules under which the Senate operates, the rules by which they consider, the different pieces of legislation coming up. I think they handled the special requests for setting a special day for the Ohio State wildflower, that kind of thing too. Anything else that the other committees don't want to handle.
And I reckon they'd probably be important if, like, for some reason there was a big push by a large amount of legislative folk to change the rules, right? But I've heard nothing of such a thing. So
Did
Yeah.
they have anything to do with getting all those bills pushed through at the last minute?
No. That was lame duck, and that was the head of the House and the head of the Senate. And some of it, well, you know that what they were trying to do is avoid giving us time to object. Bless their little hearts. And it's not unusual in a lame duck session. It's just that they had some particularly nasty ones that they shoved through. And some, of course, the governor did veto, but others he did not. Anything else? Okay. Well, I do have, whoops. Actually, I had something that I was going to start with, but I'm going to end with it because I've, failed to do it at the beginning. And that is a couple of lines from the poem that was recited today at Biden's inaugural by an absolutely fantastic poet, Amanda Gorman. And one of her stanzas just really stood out for me. She said, "We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain, if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it." And she repeated, "If only we're brave enough to see it and be it." So I thought I would close with that. I thought that was really inspiring. And yes, on the UJO Facebook page is a link to a video of the recording of her poem, if you want to see that again. All righty. Well, thank you guys.